Welcome back to Digging for Gems, the series where I try to find hidden indie, sci-fi, and fantasy gems. For episode 2, I'm going to be looking at Obsidian Awakening by Sienna Frost. This is a self-published book, and it's the first book in the Obsidian series. Now, I finished the first 250 pages of this in 2 days. Then I just stopped reading altogether completely for a few days before coming back to this book again at 8 p.m. on Saturday, and I didn't put it down until I finished it at 6 a.m. So yes, I did enjoy this book quite a lot. This will be a spoiler-free review, and I'm going to give you guys a brief overview before going into more detail. A war fought for peace, a former slave who trades away his freedom, an oracle tormented by his visions, a wife who lives to kill her husband, a half-blood son born from hatred, a tyrant who fights for unity, a girl destined to end the war, a sadistic bitch called Fate who breaks them all. 7 broken heroes, born on both sides of the war between an empire and a nomadic race of the desert, must survive being tossed into the midst of chaos and forced to decide what they treasure more, loyalty to their lands or what they hold dearest to their hearts. So there you have the synopsis for the book, and there isn't really much more to add plot-wise. It's a character-driven high fantasy story. It can get very dark at times. The world of Obsidian is ruthless, and Frost does use it to show how barbaric humans are capable of being. As far as what this book is about thematically goes, Frost actually just tells you straight up before you get to chapter 1 what this book is about. It looks at how there are no real winners in war, and how discrimination and racism have no place in the world. To really simplify the message of the story, it's about how everybody has the strength to persevere and prevail in the absence of hope. That's not my analysis, I just simplified what Frost herself said, but really I don't have anything else to add on to it. It's her book, of course she's going to be able to give a perfect analysis of it. There are some familiar themes in this book like love, loss, and family. I especially enjoyed these 3 themes because the cast is so diverse that they really accentuated different forms of them while also showing the different perspectives and ideals that the characters have regarding these things. The heart of the story is the characters, which Frost happened to do a fantastic job with. They're all layered and fucked up in their own ways. As you're told on one of the first few pages of the book, Obsidian needs to be broken in order to make a deadly weapon, and each of the characters have been or will be broken in their own ways while they're forced to face the choices they need to make along their journeys. Some are broken by the machinations of others, some by loyalty and duty, and others by fate and prophecies. But regardless of how it happens, Frost will always manage to make it increasingly devastating every time, especially considering how much you grow to love the cast as the story progresses. I think this is the first time I actually liked every character in the cast. I think at worst I felt indifferent toward the couple, but they literally had only 1 or 2 POVs put together. You want to know what kept me reading this book until 6 a.m? Solar Muradi. Apologies in advance for everything I'm going to mispronounce, but Solar Muradi is one of the main characters and he is everything I want in a big bad. And the crazy thing is, he was one of my favorites without even having a POV, and anyone that's read the book knows how true that is to his character. I think it took around 60 or 70% of the book for him to actually get his first POV, and as soon as he did, he claimed the #1 spot for me. Salar Muradi Overshawi is the leader of the Salasar. He's a tyrannical ruler who wants to conquer the White Desert, which happens to be the home of the Shakshi. For the first 60-ish% of the book, we see him through the POVs of others, but regardless of whose POV we're seeing him through and what they think of him, he is always this unstoppable force of a man. He's cunning, mercilessly calculating, and highly capable at whatever he sets out to do. This capability is not just given to him through a lucky birth or good genes, though. It comes from a life of trials that have shown him the ugly truths of the world that molded him into what he is. He'll use those closest to him to set an example, and he'll sacrifice thousands if it means saving millions. Whether or not those thousands include women, children, the elderly, or the sickly is irrelevant. He's a monster. But the thing is, a lot of the cast can be monsters. Pretty much anyone can be one, depending on their own motivations. When you have a world that is monstrous and wants to put you down, you can't be surprised when you find it's inhabited by a bunch of monsters that are willing to fight back. When we started getting Marathi POVs, I really started to love the character. He makes you question your sense of good and bad and your sense of right and wrong. How can you not love a character that makes you have such conflicting thoughts? And my love for the character only deepened as I learned more about his past, even though readers only know very little about it, and as we get to see more glimpses into his psyche and how he feels about his own actions. I saw a tweet from Frost talking about how much she likes Legend of the Galactic Heroes, and I'm glad I did see that tweet because Marathi actually reminded me of Reinhardt a little bit. They're both dictators that genuinely care for the lands that they rule over and their well-being, but Marathi is a bit more tyrannical of a dictator. But anyways, then we have Zahara, one of Marathi's many wives. Zahara is a Baravi, and Baravi are Shakshi women with signature silver hair and yellow eyes that are said to be the direct descendants of the moon goddess Ravi. She was captured and made Maradi's wife after he conquered her tribe, leaving about 8,000 survivors behind, and she was made to birth him a child. She lives to see Maradi dead. It was this relationship that showcased the most for me how talented Frost is at creating deeply complex character relationships. We see what unfolds when this unstoppable force in Maradi meets with the immovable object that is Zahara. It was this meeting that leads to a relationship that is so riddled with thorns and built upon foundations of abuse that it made me want to reread the series already just to fully appreciate the nuances of it, and it was a relationship that led to some extremely emotive storytelling for me. Outside of the relationship, Zahara is a great character herself. I'm just going to say this now so I don't have to repeat myself for the rest of the cast. Every main character is great, and each of the supporting characters are equally great for the parts that they play. As a Baravi, Zahara has been raised in a way that has led to her possessing a certain strength that causes her to be completely unyielding and unable to submit to anything by seemingly any earthly means, especially when it comes to Maradi. We see how she's been dealing with her situation since being made his wife, and we see the suffering that this has caused her, that itself has had rippling effects on those around her. The more I saw into this, the more I sympathized with her, and the more I sympathized with her, the more conflicted I felt about the relationship itself, because I wanted to see her happy and free, but that would only come at the death of Maradi, which was something I most definitely did not want to see happen. I think it speaks volumes for Frost's talent as a writer, how one relationship and two characters in a story of many can elicit so many emotions from the reader, while also making them question their own ideology and preconceptions. I'll try to go over the rest of the cast a bit quicker. I just wanted to use my favourite relationship in the book to talk a bit about what I really enjoyed in Frost's character writing. The rest of the main cast include Hashim, Dejari, Nazir, and Lasra. Honestly though, I wouldn't really say Lasra is much of an MC in this book, but it is clear as day that he will be one for the series overall. Hashim is a legendary male escort. He is the most sought after escort in Risharwi, who also happens to be the top assassin and apprentice of one of the most powerful men in the peninsula. He's one of the remaining Shakshi from the conquered area of the White Desert that Zahara is from, and after being driven out of his home as a child, he was made a slave and later on sold into the Pleasure District. When we first meet Hashim, he needs to flee from Risharwi after killing a general for reasons unknown to the reader, and this is what brings him back to his homeland, the White Desert, where his journey begins. We see Hashim struggle to reintegrate himself back into this part of his past as he's confronted by his ignorance of his own people and their traditions. And I really enjoyed watching him transition from the kind of survivor needed to survive in Risharwi to the kind needed to survive in the White Desert. While all of the characters are damaged to the point where I think it's hard to rank, I think Hashim is the most broken, and I think that shows in how he happens to also probably be the most deadly of them all, at least when it comes to being a weapon. Anything in his presence can be used as a weapon, and if there's nothing around that suffices, he can use his hands. He also has one of the great relationships in this book, in the one that he has with a young Baravi, this Baravi being Dejari, who is the daughter of the leader of one of the most powerful tribes in the White Desert. I won't detail their relationship because spoilers, but to be very brief, it's one of companionship, not without the complexity that Frost excels at. Similar to Zahara, the Zari also has the signature strength, pride, and stubbornness of Baravi, but unlike Zahara, because of her age, the Zari also has this naivety that comes from youth and a lack of experience. It was mentioned in the synopsis, so I'll talk about it here. The Zari is also the chosen one, who is prophesied to bring an end to the centuries-long war that's being waged between the Black and White Deserts. We don't really find out what it truly means to be the chosen one in this book. We're kind of just introduced to the prophecy itself. As a Baravi and daughter of one of the tribe leaders, the Jari is fated to be used in a political marriage that will result in her being used for breeding, because Baravi are the only ones that can give birth to other Baravi and oracles. Oracles are people who have visions, making them highly valuable assets and potentially detrimentally threatening to their enemies. So we see all these factors play together during the Jari's arc. Next up is Nazir. Nazir is the Jari's brother and also one of the oracles I mentioned. Maradi was my favourite character overall, but when it comes to inner conflict, it would be really hard for me to choose between the two. Nazir is cursed with knowledge in the worst way possible. Because of his visions as an oracle, he knows how all of those closest to him will die, and he has to witness all the hardships that they go through as if he's there himself. And despite having such a powerful ability, he is ultimately powerless to prevent any of it. It requires a tremendous amount of strength and resilience to live with something like this without giving up, and we see the toll that it takes on Nazir throughout the story. Also, him being a oracle makes him a lot more intriguing as well, because we never really know how much information he's sharing, whether or not he's telling the whole truth, or if he's just coasting along, letting people progress towards a fate that he's already seen. For the final member of the main cast, we have Lassara. Lassara is a prince of Rasharwi and is the mixed blood son of Muradi and Zahara. He was my least favorite of the main cast. I said earlier that he didn't even really feel much like a main character to me. That's because while everyone else's journeys start and progress in this book, it felt to me like Lassara's took the whole book to start, which is not a bad thing at all, considering why it did, but at times it left me wishing he had a bit more agency. His parents being who they are, though, resulted in a really great dynamic, because him having the blood of both Shakshi and Rasharwi ended up making him an outcast of both sides because of the hate-filled history shared between the two. Seeing how he possesses qualities of both parents though was really good too, so that's why I still really liked him despite my grievances. Being least favourite in a main cast is good is not a diss in the slightest. I want to move on from characters now, so gonna really quickly shout out Baaku, Jarem, and Dee. They're my favourites from the supporting cast, probably in that order. This book does have LGBT representation as well, for those of you who are looking for that. I saw on Frost's Twitter that one of the main characters is bi, but beyond that, the labels are pretty irrelevant. Basically, any two characters alone in a room together could end up having sex. One of the best relationships in this, actually, probably my second favourite after Muradi and Zahara, is an LGBT one. It adds so many layers to the main character that I loved, and it made the other partner really, really endearing. So talking about the world a bit now, I still don't have the best grasp on the geography if I'm being honest, but I'll try my best. So the story takes place within this peninsula. I don't know its name yet, I think it's just the peninsula for now. Within this peninsula, you have the Black Desert, the White Desert, and there's an independent nation called Makena. Not sure if that's a part of the Black Desert or if there's even more nations and empires on the peninsula, but anyways, the Black Desert is the more urbanized of the two deserts, where you have your more standard city setting, whereas the White Desert is the home of the different nomadic tribes. Both of these are really well developed, and they have their own unique and intriguing social landscapes and cultures. The Black Desert is where Salar Muradi rules over his empire, the Salasar. The majority of our time spent in the Salasar is spent in Rasharwi. It's the capital city and it's home of the Black Tower, this huge tower made of obsidian. Pretty funny that I'm reading Obsidian having the Black Tower after finishing The Lord of Chaos. But the Black Tower is where all the nobles live, and of course having all the nobles in one place leads to a lot of plotting and political intrigue, which I really enjoyed. And also during our time in Rasharwi, we do learn a lot about the people's customs and history too. For me, where Frost world building excelled was with the White Desert. She spent time herself going around the world visiting different nomadic tribes in places like Mongolia and Jordan and Egypt. She spent 3 weeks in Mongolia, going from family to family, experiencing how they live their lives, and I think it really showed in how she wrote the different tribes in her book called Khagans. Citizens of the Black Desert might view them as violent savages potentially, but they're a civilized people with strict rules deeply rooted in tradition and religious beliefs. It was great learning more about their culture and things like the different festivals and customs that they have and how politics work in between the different Khagans. I also really loved learning more about their outlook on life. Life for them is all about freedom and having the free will to make the choices that they want, and while their day-to-day lives may contain a lot of violence and death, they'll still choose to live a life like that if it means they get to live without boundaries. We also meet this band of mercenaries in the White Desert called the Rishi, which we don't learn as much about, but they are really entertaining still. Frost's time spent with the nomads is the main inspiration for the world of Obsidian, which ended up making it a really enjoyable world to spend time in, because you have this mix of Mongolia, Jordan, Egypt, and wherever else she traveled to and decided to put into the book, and it ended up resulting in a really refreshing setting. As far as the magic system goes, there is not really much to say. Some people have abilities, that's pretty much all I can tell you at the moment. Some characters have blatant powers like oracles, for example, and then there's other characters where you kind of need to pay attention to catch them. I feel like the magic system in this, if it's even a system, is more just used to give readers a sense of who is going to be confronting who later on, and maybe who is going to be a bigger player in the series. So, what do I rate this book? This book is as close to a 5-star read for me as possible without it actually being 5 stars, so I'm going to give it 4.5. Honestly, depending on my mood on any particular day, I could end up boosting this up to a 5 stars, and then who knows, the next day I'll bring it back down to a 4. 5 stars are just a good feeling for me. If I'll finish a certain book and I'll just know instantly that was definitely a 5 star read. Didn't have that good feeling when I finished this. But as I thought about it more and while doing this review, it has been slowly encroaching on that 5 out of 5 for me. The main reason this didn't quite hit 5 for me was the ending. The ending was great, but I wasn't completely satisfied. So I'm going to split the plot into what happens in the Black Desert and what happens in the White Desert. So for the Black Desert plotline, it was perfect. I literally have nothing else to say. It was just perfect from start to finish for me. When it comes to the White Desert, a particular character ended up in a position that didn't really do much for me. And regarding the climax itself, while it was as emotionally impactful as the Black Desert plotline, the conflict itself wasn't as gripping for me. So I needed both conflicts to hit as hard for me to give it that 5 out of 5. While I would normally say just pick up a book in whatever format you prefer, I highly recommend getting this in a physical edition. Frost put a lot of effort into designing the paperback for this, and I believe a hardback will be coming in the future, or at least the idea has been floated around on Twitter from her. She put a lot of illustrations into the paperback edition of the book, and the way the text plays around some of the illustrations is really nice. Let me try and find one that I like for you guys. Here. I'm pretty sure she has a thing for horses. So the illustrations kind of play around with the text, and then they set up the tone nicely for the chapter to come. Here's one I originally saw on Twitter that I thought I'd show you guys. Pretty nice one there. I believe those are all the ones I wanted to show you guys. That's all I have to say for Obsidian Awakening. Thank you guys so much for watching. I highly recommend you pick up a copy of this book. I'll leave links to where to buy it down in the description, as well as links to the author's socials if you want to go check that out. Give her a follow. She posts some pretty entertaining tweets, and she's a pretty big cat person if you're into that. So that's all for this video, guys. That's all for this video. Next one will be on A Crown of Swords. I'll see you guys in the next one.